I will also acknowledge the honors here where we are gathered today. Thank you so much for having me. As Josh just alluded to, the occasion really is that we've just launched this book in London in June, and I thought it would be a great opportunity because it was in Canberra for another event that will take place tomorrow to also come and talk to you about it. So there will be a bit of reference to this book later down the track of this talk. But just to kind of set the scene, the talk was made possible by the ACM. Thank you very much, ACM. It's the Association of Computing Machinery. It's also the organization that hosts that CKI chapter that Josh just alluded to, the Canberra or the ACT kind of node. It's the world's largest industry peak body for computing professionals, so bringing people involved in industry as well as academia together. And it hosts the CHI conference, which in our field of interaction design and human-computer interaction is pretty much the biggest event in the calendar each year as a kind of top-tier academic conference. And you can find out more about the ACM at acm.org. This book has been in the making for quite a bit. We've started to pivot our research into the space of more than human futures nearly 10 years ago. And there's a couple of examples of what we've been up to very early on. These are my core conspirators, Sarah Heiplinger in London. Oh, okay, let me try this again. What about now? Yeah. I did, yeah, the sound one, yes. Okay, we're back in the room. Yeah, so Sarah's originally from Austria, grew up in Australia, but now works and lives in London, and she's been doing a lot of really interesting work with community groups, including Spitalfield Farm that is in London, and that over there is Rachel Clark, who was at Newcastle University in the UK, has moved to London to the University of the Arts. And the three of us edited this book together. So it's actually a collection of a range of chapters from a number of authors across the world. And we managed to be the herders of the cats, the wranglers of all of the great contributions coming together here. So to just set the scene and introduce myself, originally we've been working in the space of urban informatics, and we just grabbed a little bit of lunch, Josh and I, before the talk, and he asked me, well, if you were to describe your profile and your research interest in a Venn diagram, what would that look like? And I thought, oh, that's interesting, because there's going to be a Venn diagram coming up in this talk. When I finished my PhD, I did it originally in media communication studies. It focused on master plan communities. I was very interested in how technology that gets embedded, or it was starting to be embedded.
Because it's sharing these slides, but not the place. So we can
we should be using Zoom. That's the whole problem, I think. Okay, maybe I'll just share the whole screen, and then hopefully something will share that comes through. Yes. Do the sound thing. What about now? Third time lucky?
Click a couple of times back and forth.
Yes, that works. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Let me just move this out of the way. All right. Yes, original background in computer science, was very interested though in the social aspect of technology, and so the topic I focused on in 2002, around the time that I started my PhD, was how technology gets embedded in the built environment. And we had case studies around master plan communities. In fact, one that happened around the same time in Melbourne was Williamstown. In Brisbane, we looked at the Kelvin Grove Urban Village. There's probably others around the country. And they were all about developers that were interested in putting fast broadband internet these days what people kind of classify as the NBN, into these developments. And as social scientists, we were interested in what will that do, because the marketing ploy, the kind of messaging that those developers attached to this grand idea was that it will create a village atmosphere, this kind of idea of an urban village. And we thought, is that really going to happen? So fast forward to the end of the PhD, we realized that doesn't happen automatically, only because you put the wires, pipes, and ducts in place doesn't necessarily create a sense of community. But we continue to be interested at, to do research in this intersection of the digital and the physical. And this was an illustration we created and commissioned at the time to visualize what we were doing. And we called this space Urban Informatics. And that's a Venn diagram that just was asking me about. So the kinds of three domains that I try and position myself around are people, place, and technology, the kind of social, spatial, and technical aspects, and how they can come together. Now, keep in mind, this was 2006. So it was a particular moment in time when UbiComp was really kind of on the rise, ubiquitous computing. Other terms that were used around that time were, oh, you look worried. Is it still working? It's working. Other terms that were used around the time, like urban computing, urban UX, or urban interaction design. So there are other kinds of terminology used for this coming together of interest from people in the kind of spatial domain, technical domain, and social domain. I might just add a disclaimer that these days, the term urban informatics is very different. If you Google urban informatics these days, it's pretty much the same as urban science. So a lot of colleagues and scholars, particularly in the US, they've kind of looked at this much more from a numbers game point of view. So it's a much more statistically driven exercise of data analytics, data science. And whilst we now do some of that as well, our kind of original definition was very different. It was really looking at this coming together of people, place, and technology. You can see there when we started this work, it was quite early days. Colorati had created the Sensible City Lab at MIT, and I visited their lab very early on. And we had a lot of common ground at that time. They were really interested in these kinds of experimentations at that urban level. Of what can we do with everything kind of, communicating data. And the city was just oozing in data, and everyone was just so excited about, we can count the cabs in Singapore, and when the rain cloud comes and the cabs are moving somewhere, and how fascinating that was. Again, this timeline goes to like 2015. It was done by Anthony Townsend at the time to map some of these developments. And by now, I think there were probably even more of these research centers, but a lot of them focus much more on that corporate end, that kind of data analytics end of this particular research. We started to not necessarily push back against, but we tried to stand our ground and maintain a bit of a critical edge. So some of the work we've done since was looking at urban design, still interfaces, but more in the context of community engagement, political activism, and how people can also use some of the infrastructure to push back against some of the status quo. That picture, for instance, which I'm still proud that a big publishing house like Springer accepted that on the cover. They probably don't actually know what they're looking at. Does anyone recognize what that image, or has anyone seen this before? So Rio de Janeiro, Brazil hosted the FIFA World Cup in, yes, I think so. And this is actually protesters that installed these LCD screens on their heads with the kinds of ads for pornography, as well as children that were prostituted to the international visitors for very cheap prices, without being prosecuted, without that the police would do anything about it. And there is a chapter by Leah Rico that looks at some of the ways that communities were trying to utilize media architecture, interaction design to actually raise awareness about this happening at the same time as this mega sports event was taking place. And so there's other examples of how communities were starting to embrace technology, not just for this, let's optimize the city, let's focus on efficiencies, let's focus on productivity and so forth, but they were looking at the other side of the spectrum to actually identify opportunities of what communities can do in order to bring about the kinds of political agendas to reimagine what the city can do. And that's kind of why we called this the citizen's right to the digital city, kind of in homage of Lefebvre's original right to the city. We've also been doing a lot of work around methods of what kinds of variations of core design and action research we can employ that is suitable to the context of built environments. And so this volume here is talking about living labs and a specific flavor of living labs that we've been calling social living labs. Again, it brings colleagues together from around the world, especially in Europe. There's quite a huge interest around living labs to this day. In fact, some of the funding schemes have been making it a requirement for a living lab to be part of the remit of what you would propose to different funding bodies under originally Horizon 2020 and then some of the subsequent schemes as well. These days, I'm affiliated with two research labs or research centers at QUT. One is the Design Lab, which has subsumed a lot of that work we've originally been doing under Urban Informatics. And in that space, the two main foci are around more than human futures, which is what I'm going to be talking about today, as well as a new bid that we've been putting together with a number of colleagues led by UNSW. This is for a new ARC Center of Excellence that's just actually gone in, the expression of interest has gone in, and it's about the creative visualization of climate change events with the view of trying to increase levels of community preparedness, resilience in regional and remote communities. So it's looking at some of the advances that not just UNSW have been doing in the iCinema program at Art and Design, but also other researchers and research centers across the country, and how we can make them more accessible and more widely useful to those that don't have, the multi-million-dollar infrastructure that is available in the Kensington campus, for instance. In the Digital Media Research Center, I'm interested in data care, we've been calling it, which is our umbrella term for an interest around privacy, surveillance, data governance concerns, notions of technological sovereignty and data sovereignty. And we've just finished an ARC discovery that is looking at geoprivacy and location-based services. And we've been trying to put together a follow-up grant that is looking at planning support systems. So that's kind of where the data piece still continues, but again, much more from a critical data studies point of view, rather than from the typical kind of urban science point of view. And the other program in the DMRC is now renamed Creating Better Digital Futures. That used to be quite narrowly focused on digital inclusion and participation. And we had grants in that space, the Living Lab grant, for instance, or the book on Living Labs that was part of the grant that came out of this program. And now it has a bit of a wider remit. And that's where I'm trying to situate some of the crossovers with more than human futures. Because researchers in that space, they're often very theoretically and conceptually rich, but they're also pissed off because of the contrast between what they propose it could be and what the reality is. And we just had the elections in Queensland, and I was so happy to be on a flight out of there. So the kind of anger in the belly translates that into this space of community activism and political advocacy, and how digital platforms, tools, and means can be recruited and employed to try and amplify community voices. And there is no lack of issues, to put it diplomatically, in that space of the smart city. if you put in smart city as a term, these are the kinds of images that pop up, which is a visualization that just suggests that it is the coming together of Wi-Fi, e-commerce applications, IoT sensors, autonomous vehicles, robots, automation, AI. Take all the buzzwords in the tech industry, plus the new ones coming up that we don't even know about. And you just put them into the city, and that's kind of what the smart city is about. It's this layering of digital technology and the built environment. And it is very exciting for engineers. I go into the different pockets at QUT where people are working on this, and it's just fascinating of what you are able to do. And I agree it is, but it also comes with challenges. Because when engineers are left to their own devices to just figure things out for themselves on the basis of the technological possibilities without having any bounds or any grounding in the humanities, then we can make, these kinds of Black Friday dystopian scenarios reality, where the kinds of very, very minute details that you might be working on in order to allow advanced air mobility, where today we are kind of thinking, okay, there's a drone that will just deliver a can of Coke, right, from this office works or Bunnings car park to the next person as the last mile kind of solution. Well, that advancement of having those drones fly autonomously and talk to each other and actually sketch out the lower airspace in order to avoid obstacles, birds, trees, power lines, and so forth, that is becoming so sophisticated that the same technology can also be used for either malicious purposes or for military purposes. And so the way that overseas companies have started to identify Australia as their playground in order to test this kind of technology is an indication that the kinds of regulatory framework that we have is great for them because it doesn't exist. They can do whatever they want here. There's another one. Obviously, these are AI generated. It's quite entertaining of what it comes up with. I think it was just like dystopian smart city, maybe. It was pretty simple. There's a little video. The soundtrack is very soothing. I'm just going to tone it down a little bit to talk over it. So this was a rendering a couple of years ago from my colleagues at the Sensible City Lab I mentioned earlier, the Cohabitation initiative. And they looked at just, how rush hour is actually a global phenomenon that happens everywhere, no matter the time zone, the cultural context, the history, all the way from Russia to New York, from Singapore to London. There is a thing that is called rush hour, which seems to suggest that there is also this human behavioral pattern of getting up in the morning and then jumping in the car going to work, and work happens to be somewhere in a central place where then the congestion is created. That means there is congestion, traffic congestion, say from 6 to 9 o'clock. In some cities, it's extended, and China's often heralded as the kind of cities that are tier 1 cities where there's 24/7 rush hour. In fact, when we did some field work in China, we've been planning pretty much just 2 meetings a day, 1 meeting in the morning, 1 meeting in the afternoon, because it wasn't possible really to get to any other place any sooner than that. What it also though illustrates is a particular vision of looking at cities and urban interactions, which is from above. So it has this very kind of bird's eye helicopter view that often negates the kinds of intricacies of what happens when you dive down onto the street level and you actually try and unpack some of the things happening on there. The other element that is obviously of interest in the smart city agenda, especially here in Australia, is around the tectonic aspects, the architectural aspects, so housing, office buildings, infrastructure, and infrastructure projects, notions like asset sweating, which is how we get more out of infrastructure assets that we've built through data that can help us better maintain them. I mentioned the data analytics piece, and also this coming together of these different streams into what has been termed intelligent control centers. This one is an early one that IBM has installed in Rio de Janeiro, probably around 2011 or 2012. At that time, it was called the largest array of screens in the Southern Hemisphere. And it is kind of, looks very similar to JPL in Pasadena, where there is, highly trained specialists that are sending a robotic mission to Mars. But here, people are, looking after a metropolis. And I suppose when you're sitting in traffic and you're stuck and you want to get to work or you want to get to, an important place, then optimization is really something that you'd like. You kind of sit there and think, why isn't the traffic flowing? Maybe we should build more lanes, more roads, more tunnels to make it happen. And maybe these guys can help in optimizing these kinds of issues. But this thinking of looking at a problem from this very populist view and then trying to come up with solutions, in this case, a bus that is kind of on the second lane above to overcome that gridlock, that is only really looking at one array of what human ingenuity might be able to achieve, which is sometimes also exactly what makes the problem worse, right? So there is a notion that traffic planners or transport planners have known for decades, probably since the 60s, which is called induced demand. So if you create a resource that becomes more attractive, then the uptake and use of that resource will increase. But we don't want the traffic to increase, but that's kind of what we are doing when we buy into what some have labeled technological solutionism. And it is not limited to traffic. Traffic is a very illustrative kind of point to unpack this and make sense of it, but it actually happens all across the different facets of smart cities and what they're about, and it goes even beyond that. At the national level, I still remember the federal coalition government that was talking about net zero, and I think one of the commentators in the media kind of portrayed the solution that was put forward as trying to compete in the Olympics in swimming competition by being obese and relying on bikini technology to try and win gold. Rather than actually focusing on net reductions. If you think this, dystopian kind of messaging is far-fetched, just an hour flight from here, that's real. This is our mayor, just got re-elected earlier this year, Adrian Schrenner, and he signed deals with Whisk, which is one of the startups that will bring these air taxis to Brisbane to host not to host the Olympics, but in preparation for us hosting the Olympics, because they pretty much sat around closed doors in a boardroom table and said, Brisbane is stuffed, and we're not going to fix it between now and 2032. So maybe at least the rich can buy a ticket and jump into an air taxi and then fly to their venue in order to get to those sporting events. And this is already the second phase, right? So what I mentioned earlier about drone delivery services and there being someone that wants to get their Starbucks coffee delivered via drone, that's happening 100 times a minute in Logan, which is the world's largest test site for drone delivery service, which is the city right next to Brisbane. So these dystopian futures are already unfolding. This is a rendering of Skyports, which is an Australian startup that has identified a whole bunch of locations where they're going to have vertiports. Vertiports sometimes can be that big, but they can also be smaller. You can think of, again, your Bunnings or your Officeworks car park, and delivery drivers might just go there to drop off food, and then from there the drone will take it up to the neighborhood where someone has ordered that food. But if you live near there, you'll have quite a bit of noise coming your way, because those drones will then, you will have a mini airport in your backyard in various suburban locations. And if you go to the Skyports website, you will see that there's already hundreds of those locations where they've signed deals. So you might have a look and see whether, your neighborhood in Canberra has already been earmarked to be the next destination for a vertiport. We've been trying to obviously critique some of these things happening. This is one example in publishing the Journal of Urban Technology, where we're talking about how we could reconceptualize smart cities to evade this kind of urban ecocide that we are approaching. Coming more into the human-centered design space and the interaction design space, a lot of it is really not the fault, but there is a certain level of complicity of designers and engineers that say they're doing the right thing by being human-centered, but sometimes it's precisely the human-centeredness that is actually causing some of these issues. Some of these, maybe from this distance, we kind of look at it and think these are actually quite perverted outcomes. And one of the starkest examples we use in our Master of Design is Joule. People heard about Joule? So if you haven't, this is in a nutshell what they managed to do. You got the blue line, which is cigarettes and nicotine and cigarettes, and the way that over time we've had very continuous reduction from the late 90s of 35% down to 5.8, and then 20 years of that reduction in teenage nicotine addiction wiped out by vapes. And Joule was the invention of a bunch of graduates, I think actually two, from Stanford's design school that thought, wouldn't it be nice if we come up with a medical device that can help those remaining people hovering here at that level of cigarette addiction, and we give them an exit drug. It's going to be digital, it's going to be monitored, it's going to be connected to your phone, it's going to be microdosed in nicotine, so you can wean yourself off cigarettes and you can live smoke-free. What happened though is that whilst they solved the technical problem of coming up with a design that wouldn't explode in your pocket or explode in your mouth when you're drawing a vape from it, they solved all the industrial design challenges. What they didn't solve was the fact that the cigarette industry, initially fighting it, looked at it and thought, this is the best thing ever. These two design graduates from Stanford have pretty much managed to do what the entire tobacco industry failed to do in the entire past maybe 3 decades, which is to get cigarettes back into the hands of kids. It made smoking sexy again. And we now have this new epidemic of kids being addicted to nicotine as a result of a process of design thinking, which entailed a marketing campaign, pretty colors adopted like similar to what Apple would do to sell the first iPod, different flavors, the kind of very privacy sensitive thing of just putting it up your sleeve. So when you're at school, the teachers wouldn't necessarily see it. You can quickly just kind of do a quick vape and then you wouldn't necessarily be detected. So it had all these features plus a social media campaign on Snapchat and TikTok and so forth that really made this product go viral and cause this. And so in some of our work, we're trying to unpack of where did this go wrong? Because all the time, even the employees and stuff, they were all on the same page. They really wanted to do good. In fact, much later, when they were bought out by big tobacco, they were completely flabbergasted. They had no idea this would happen. They felt betrayed that their startup company, that was a medical company, was all of a sudden bought by the very enemy that they were fighting for all this time. Why am I mentioning this? Because it's a pattern in user-centered design that happens quite a bit. This is another example of user-centered design. I'm going to use the bottle maybe here as an example. So I'll just pick this up. I feel good about it because it says it's recycled, and I can put it back into the recycling. So, not going to produce any plastic waste. It has these nice little ripples there, so it's not going to slip out even if there's condensation on it. I can grip it and hold it. It doesn't leak. I can put it in my bag. It's very lightweight. I can, hold it like this and won't get tired. When I open it, it has all these kinds of nice, smooth edges. So when I, drink from it, I'm not going to slice open my lips or anything. I can have it frozen. I can have it in the fridge. It has all these qualities in such a simple product that all relate to human comfort and convenience. It makes it a really great design object, and the coffee cup is another one. I won't burn my fingers. It has the lid there, it has a little second opening for the air to escape when I drink from it. It's a piece of ingenuity. People seen this? This is a little small, maybe. This depicts 410,000 paper cups, equal to the number of disposable hot beverage paper cups that are used in the US every 15 minutes. And this was by Chris Jordan, a photographer, artist, and activist. And it's from 2008, so it's actually quite a number of years ago. The number of paper cups in use would probably be higher. So again, it has a very stark contrast between what designers have invented in order to be acceptable, to be useful, in order to meet design briefs given by corporations. But then the consequence of that is that it's actually so attractive that still to this day, and especially after COVID, we had actually quite a big push of using heat cups. And then COVID kind of wiped a lot of that out, and people have gotten back to the old habit of picking up the regular coffee cups. So it does a lot of that. Despite us knowing the consequences, so there's the limits of growth, the Club of Rome, this is kind of 70s, I think 76. And it happens in the built environment, coming back to that topic as well. So this was a masterclass I've done at the Politecnico di Milano. And these were a whole class of service designers. I was very interested working with them because service design is very much trained of being given a brief by industry around service issues and then using design methodologies in order to respond to those briefs. And so I gave them very different briefs. The briefs that we gave them were made up briefs for nature, to try and improve nature, and to then force them to apply service design methodology in pursuit of making nature happy, not a customer happy. As part of sensitizing them to some of these issues, we went on a field trip early on, which is to the Bosco Verticale, which is Italian for the vertical forest. And this building has won multiple awards, and it's often this iconic example of green buildings because it's green. The problem with this being an icon and an example of green buildings is green, yes, but apart from that, it doesn't really fulfill any of our other aspirations. It's not affordable. You have to be very rich to be able to afford an apartment in there. It doesn't do anything around the internal energy usage other than there being ornamental plants on the facade that makes it look green. But in terms of the actual approach to being green, not so much. Goes further than that. If you're actually, able to afford, you move in there, you're really a lover of nature. At your old place, you had all your pot plants, and now you move in there, you'll be disappointed because you're not allowed to touch anything. It's an insurance risk. If the residents were allowed to muck around with those trees on their balconies, they might be giving the trees the wrong fertilizer. The trees might go weak and they might fall over the balcony in a high wind and they might kill someone. So the whole building is being maintained on behalf of the residents, and the residents are forbidden to muck around with it. It's against the bylaws. That way, the building owners and managers can actually ensure that there's a consistency in the facade and it continues to look green without that the pesky residents, interfere with the beautiful plan that the architect has created. But nature is not bound by bylaws. So in the meantime, the rats have moved in, cockroaches have moved in. Things, creepy crawlies that you would find in a forest, because it is a forest, it's a vertical forest. It has quite mature trees, and these are, they look maybe small, but they're actually quite sizable. So it would attract pigeons because they like to nest there and hide at night. So the residents don't like that. They call them pests. We've got to get rid of the pests in our forest, but we created a forest that attracts animals. You see the conundrum? The other thing is I flew my drone there and I got so much in trouble because I wanted to have this photo that we took there, which was from our drone. And I flew up the building as well. Had to run. We did this little work that is comparing the kinds of approaches in the built environment about building assessment frameworks and how they clash with the expectation of the IPCC. So the IPCC would say we need to achieve absolute reductions. We need to achieve a net decrease, and we want to at least have zero target, but ideally, and you've seen this kind of creep into the mainstream coverage in the media these days, ideally net positive, sometimes climate positive, sometimes nature positive. But the assessment frameworks, and there's a couple of those, they focus much more on brownie points for developers and construction companies to give them a mathematical tool to create efficiencies that are a little bit better than the previous building. So they can say, yes, we've got now 5 stars or 6 stars or whatever the rating might be. But the problem with that is that over time, and this is from 2009 to 2020, baseline energy consumption published by the US Department of Climate Change and Energy Efficiency for non-residential buildings. These are office buildings. And you don't have to be statistically minded to see that that graph is going up. No doubt about it. So despite us having all these different energy efficiency tools and assessment frameworks, we're just building more shit. And the footprint of us building more and more is very, very quickly eating away the efficiency yields that come from those sustainability measures. This article has already been published a while ago. It's an op-ed. It talks about how neoliberalism has conned us into fighting climate change as individuals. This one here in Al Jazeera is going even a step further. Quite funny to read. It's why a hipster, vegan, green tech economy is not sustainable. And there is something in it. I actually started with these articles when we had executive MBA students at QUT visiting, and it was great seeing their heads explode. What do you mean? We all have to buy a Tesla and then the world will be a better place. No, there is more to it. Because whilst the footprint where you draw the square might be okay, the way that you determine your criteria, you're just shifting the problem elsewhere because the actual purview needs to be so wide that we look at the planetary impact. Paul Durisch wrote this and published at the Designing Interactive Systems Conference, where he talks about the politics of design and the design of politics. And in that article, he not only criticizes HCIs, human-computer interactions, quite narrow focus on usability and thus the user, sometimes groups of users. He also calls what he calls for what he terms technologies of scale making, which is the way that we can look at interaction design, platforms, media, different kinds of avenues as an ability for community to amplify their voices in opposition to the kind of corporate mainstream neoliberal agenda that is largely just greenwashing us. This is published by the Washington Post a couple of years ago. All little bits of cobalt that go into our lithium-ion batteries to make my iPhone run all day, and I'm already down to 52%. They originated somewhere there, which is a dad and his son digging a tunnel in the Congo, in Africa, maybe some 7 meters deep, and trying to find enough cobalt in order to then sell this to the next middleman and then the next middleman until it goes to a wholesale market, until eventually, maybe 3 or 4 nodes later, it could maybe get captured by the supply chain transparency projects of Tesla and Apple and Samsung. But when they claim that they're clean, it's largely because the square that they've drawn doesn't include these gig economy workers in those places where not just cobalt, but also some rare of metals would be required. On the other side then, and in the interest of time, I might just show you a bit of a snapshot of this. There's the e-waste problem, which is where, due to planned obsolescence, we will be conditioned to get to the next iPhone.
This is where
Christmas
electronic
comes
waste,
soon,
television
so the
sets,
next iPhone is released, the next
computers,
software
microwaves,
update is released, and so we're in a
from most
spiral
developed countries.
of wanting the
And
next product. Sometimes very hard to repair them. So planned
Then you
obsolescence
find
also
kids,
goes hand in
some
hand
as
with an
young as
absence of a
5,
right to
6,
repair.
7, 8.
And both of them
Coming
work
here
in
to this
tandem in order to
landfill
make us
to
buy
pick
another thing.
up
Sometimes the
these
mobile phone
electronic
carriers have
waste,
already
salvage
created
metals such as copper. They
contracts
sell these things
where you're always
to
on the
buy
latest
food, they
version.
use some
You
of the
just
money to
kind
buy
of
food, they give
somehow
some money
return
to
the
their
old
parents,
one
and
that you
some
just
would use
received
part of
last
the money
year and you get
to
the
buy
new one.
whatever they need to go
But
to
where do
school.
they go? They go here, which is in Accra in Ghana, one of the world's largest electronic waste dump sites that causes pollution at that local level, but also health harms for the kids that are recycling those. Mike Montero wrote this book that opened a lot of eyebrows. It created a lot of discussion about how design is complicit in a lot of these kinds of relationships between academia, industry, government, regulation, product, consumerism. And he says that the world is working exactly as designed. It's not working very well, which means we need to do a better job of designing it. Which brings me hopefully to the next more uplifting, I don't know, section, which is about post-anthropocentric futures, or maybe post-capitalocentric futures, which is in itself a critique of the fact that humans are not equally responsible for what we are dealing with. You couldn't blame, for instance, people living in precarious livelihoods in Accra that are just trying to get by breaking down e-waste for some of the situations that we've just been talking about. So it's not necessarily that the humans in Anthro are all equally to blame for where we are at. But I think the economic system that we are embedded in, that is still based on very old paradigms of growth and endless growth, plus coupled with the political neoliberal kind of framework, that those two might be much more responsible for some of the things that we are witnessing. And they haven't changed. They've gotten better. They've gotten better at capitalizing on the harm that has been caused. So and some that might have attended Martin Tumosh's talk when he came and spoke in the Node, they would remember that Martin's also just recently published a book that argues for embracing a life-centered version of design that looks not just at human needs, but the planetary health and well-being. And that makes a lot of sense. And if you look at the graphic, it makes a lot of sense. But it's actually really difficult to do because of how vested and ingrained our current system is. And once you start changing things, you will realize how much pushback you're getting. So the tension is like a huge magnet that just pulls you back in this direction, and every single step of the way. Our own journey in terms of the scholarly kind of journey, I suppose, started with More Than Human Worlds that David Edmund wrote, The Spell of the Centuries, which I highly recommend. It's just such a fascinating book that he did in 96 or 97, I think. And it goes on a whole world tour of looking at how various indigenous peoples have still maintained an ability not just to live in harmony with nature, but also to read nature. So he makes this very interesting argument about how the advent of humans being able to read and write has at the same time managed to disconnect us from reading nature. So the spell of the centuries is like his way of describing various ways of being able to be connected to nature. There is a whole bunch of accounts. I'm happy to share the slides if you're interested in going into these various trains of thought. But I want to highlight and point out Laura's work because that was quite fundamental for our interest around cities and smart cities. So Laura published this in MIT's design issues in 2016, saying decentering the human in the design of collaborative cities is something we should consider. And it was heresy. Because at that time, we had this entire period of coming out of a 10-year research lab that was created largely in response to what tech companies were doing that we called technologically centered. Like, say, the first ubiquitous cities or U cities in South Korea in 2007, 2008, they were pretty much the South Korean chaebol, Samsung, South Korean Telecom, LG, working together with the government to just say, okay, this city is going to be a smart city, and here's like all the scenarios we've dreamt up about, you know, you're coming back from work and your favorite pizza arrives at the same time on your doorstep. I'm like, oh, that's fantastic. Really want a pepperoni pizza. So in response to these technologically centered dreams, we wanted to be human-centered. And it was just so natural to us that in opposition to these tech-centric technological solutionist kinds of approaches, we would be human-centered. But this made us kind of to question the complicity in how human-centeredness often gets dumbed down to human convenience and human comfort and what sells shit. And it's really this disconnect between giving shit and selling shit. So we played around with different methods. This was at the Participatory Design Conference. Rachel was one of the key organizers of this workshop where we tried to do a workshop where we tried to identify what the different impacts of smart city technologies are on different animals in the city. And we managed to excite others from participants of that workshop. We did another one at the CMT conference, the Communities and Technologies conference. We tapped people on the shoulder that we knew were doing interesting work. And so we managed to eventually, fast forward to now with lots of delays during COVID and deaths, pregnancies, marriages and divorces of various author teams in between. But eventually we managed to get this book completed, which I'm really happy about. But it's not just yet another academic book. I mean, yes, it is, there it is. But at the same time, I think what's really fascinating is the array of projects that people are working on. And so just going through, you know, the table of contents there of the different colleagues around the world and what they've been working on, it's just very fascinating. All the backgrounds as well. So there is animal-computer interaction, there is urban planning, there is geographers, there is cultural studies. It's, yeah, I'm really pleased to see also the passion of all those author teams and how much of their own tears and sweat they put in there. And for us, it has also been a little bit of peer therapy, like to actually come across this work and realizing this complexity of design overall, of how it gets used in the corporate machinery, isn't always very easy. But then to build this community of scholars that are trying to come up with new ways of reinventing design methods, of experimenting, of exploring different ways of going about their practice has been really, really exciting. I did get this flyer that you find on your chairs. I also got these 2 copies here, and they're actually giveaways. The only problem is that they're supposed to go to the 2 chairs that have yellow dots that no one sits on.
Next.
So we'll have to find another little quiz or challenge of how to go about it.
Have a small library. Want to donate one to you?
we can maybe do that as well. I'll just pass them around for everyone to just maybe have a quick look and
then you start.
and then in the you know, I don't want to take them back with me. I should have them in my suitcase, so I will leave them here. But maybe Josh can be creative cybernetics lecturer and come up with a quick riddle maybe, or challenge or competition. Oh, yeah, true. That's
So
true.
we just do closest to the chair that had the yellow dot, and that's it.
Okay.
So with I get a ruler out. So this is the dot here.
Yes.
And then that's the other yellow dot. Is guys, I don't know, you need to find it. This is like what we write. Maybe you can connect and check. Connect with that and check.
Yeah, once you're done reading it, you can pass it on to the person sitting behind you. I'm going to wrap up. I'm just going to give you a teaser into one chapter, which is a chapter I wrote with Mary Graham and Michelle Maloney. Mary Graham is an Indigenous elder from Helensvale at the Gold Coast, but she also specialises at the University of Queensland in comparative philosophy. It was super fascinating working with her because of this huge amount of wisdom that she sits on, and she's very happy to share with people, including us. And so we sat together and had this question about what would it mean to design cities from an Indigenous point of view. That was kind of the starting point. And where we ended up was a chapter that really had a very close look at time, which often in the smart city discourse is about very short periods of time, as in, navigation, get me quickly from A to B. But here we looked at cathedral thinking. And the idea of cathedral thinking is that, you are given the responsibility of creating something that you won't survive, because it'll take longer than your lifetime. And Sagrada Familia is one of those examples, because Gaudi is long dead. The work began in 1882, and it won't be completed until 2030 or 2032. They're still building various towers there. So this chapter is called The City of Good Ancestors, and that was Mary's term that she didn't invent. She actually referred to another member of her community that kept using the term, but she also said that that term is actually used fairly well established, which refers kind of to what we would call sustainability. But the City of Good Ancestors, or just to be a good ancestor, is about leaving behind something that you feel proud of, so that your kids and your grandkids would say, you've been a good ancestor. And so we're looking here at urban governance and design from a relationist ethos. And Mary has been very kind in explaining some of these concepts, but also translating them into the context of urban governance and how it could perhaps be applied. Just to give you one snippet, these are the bioregions in Australia, which is a mapping of how different fauna and flora have organized themselves on the basis of climatic patterns, river systems, proximity to the shore, proximity to deserts. And this is how Indigenous peoples have organized themselves. And there's actually a correlation, which you might think, well, of course, but if you then look at how colonial settlers have organized themselves, it's very different. We would have local government areas crisscross and zigzag in either smaller or larger entities all across these bioregions, which then means that, for instance, if you have a natural system, it could be that one little corner is the responsibility of this local government, another corner might actually be elevated to state government responsibility. You could even have the national government responsible. So there is a fragmentation both horizontally, geographically, as well as vertically in terms of the levels of governance in Australia. So we've been talking about how we could revise this or rethink this. And it starts off with Aboriginal law and ethics in that chapter, but it also at the end goes into more practical examples. I'm not going to try and explain this. You will really have to read it because I can't do it justice in the remaining time. But I do mention the practical component in that chapter, which is part 2, which is the contribution that Michelle Maloney has made. She's a lawyer, but she specializes in earth jurisprudence, which is the part of law that is interested in how nature can be bestowed rights and how the legal system could be rethought in order to give rights to nature. And so the Green Prince approach that Michelle has been leading is really related because it's questioning zoning and planning approaches in Australian cities. And it's trying to organize them to be much more attuned and in harmony with those bioregions. So it goes through these different steps that you see there from 1 to 8. And the book goes into more detail, and her website goes into not just more detail, but there's also practical tools and resources available for some communities that want to do this. She is currently running trials at the Sunshine Coast, where there is 2 big local government areas. There is the Sunshine Coast Council around Maroochydore, there's the Noosa Council, and we've been looking at some of the overlaps and over the kind of mapping of bioregion on top of that, and what communities might be able to do to undo some of the kind of dissecting that happens from local government boundaries. If you're interested in finding out more what we are up to, there is a website of that our research group is using, which is research.edu.au/more-than-human. We got a seminar series as well, and those talks are recorded. So if you'd like to just listen into some of the speakers that we've had, we had a very fascinating guy come to us who specializes in sonification. He did a super amazing project in Canada, looking at sea life. I remember one section in his talk where he had all these audio sounds of whales and how they communicate with each other, but then how the communication was disrupted by big tanker arriving, and they had these underwater microphones positioned, plus a mapping of where the ship was and the whales and how they were talking, and the sting came, and it's just super fascinating. So if you're interested in some of the other examples of more than human approaches, do check out the events tab, and there's some videos under there, plus pubs and what projects we're currently working on. So with that, I think, I don't know if we've got still time, it's just on the dot 3 o'clock. I thank you very much for coming in on a Monday to this talk, and yeah, it's been great to see so many people interested in this. This is not too far from here. This is at Sleepy Burrows, which is a wombat sanctuary just outside Canberra. We've been doing some work there. We've done our in Sleepy Burrows looking at sarcoptic mange and wombats, and also some of the orphans where mum was sadly hit by a car or kept illegally as a pet, or as I said, some of them have sarcoptic mange. But yeah, thank you very much.
If there are any questions, jump in. You're gonna get something right.